Tyreek Hill traded to Miami, and like I said, that one happened fast. And Miami's kind of loading up right now, like they're an AFC West squad. I will give them that. They do have the Bills in their division that they have to compete with, and then the Patriots are always pesky there, and of course the Jets are trying to be on the come up themselves. And first thing I thought of with this signing was you got to feel for Cedric Wilson and Trent Sherfield. Sherfield came over with Mike McDaniels from San Francisco, thinking he might be getting a shot in a familiar offense. Cedric Wilson just got signed from Dallas to Miami. They were looking to carve out a role, but obviously Tyreek Hill, much like he does to defenses, dashed their dreams. But I think, like, for real, when we get down to like a fantasy perspective, having those two guys on the same squad, Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle, is going to be absolutely nasty for defenses to plan against. I'm not 100% sure what I think about it for fantasy yet. My first thought was that I don't necessarily love it, just because I think from a short-term perspective, especially, they do a lot of the same things. And I think with McDaniel coming in, and maybe like people get too rigid on that he's coming from a Shanahan offense, and I might be guilty of that as well, but didn't really expect them to be pass heavy enough to support what people want from Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So I think, like, if they're going to reach some ceiling, then they're going to have to go a little bit more pass heavy. I'm curious to hear what you think, though. Do you think they're going to kind of go that way a little bit more so than what we thought McDaniels was going to bring over? Or is it going to be not necessarily top 5 in the league, but still enough to support these guys?
I think they'll be a little more of a balanced offense than they were last year. Like, I think they'll try to run the ball with McDaniels. They definitely signaled that's what their plan is with some of their offseason acquisition. They've acquired running backs and running backs that are familiar with the system and kind of their skill sets align with the outside zone scheme and everything. So I think McDaniels wants to run the ball, and they've definitely shored up that offensive line, or are doing their best to, do that. So I think they'll try to run the ball, but they could use their passing game as an extension of the run game. We saw such a low average depth of target from Tua last year. We could see much of the same, but with two dynamic weapons who could be on the receiving end of those targets in Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle. And I think the other huge loser in this is Mike Gesicki, no doubt about it.
Yeah, Mike Gesicki or the running back target share as well for me. Like, I think you mentioned that short average depth of target. I think that could get a little bit of a boost up. And in that case, I think the running back target share with Chase Edmonds coming in, I think there is going to be a little bit of that pass catching work kind of baked in there. But I kind of wonder if that might be impacted alongside Mike Gesicki. But I definitely think Gesicki is the biggest loser. I think what we're going to see is probably a funnel offense to those two guys, and Gesicki falls off a little bit. That's the hope, at least, right?
Fingers crossed there.
That's the hope.
And I think the offensive line is the X factor. Like, I think it all trickles down from, if they're able to protect Tua, then we could probably see Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill operate more in the intermediate and in the deep part of the field. So it's going to be interesting. Like, Tyreek Hill, it was a pretty crazy deal to see. And, like, he got a pretty crazy deal paid-wise, too. We'll see how that ends up working out in the long run. But he has at least 70 yards receiving per game in each of the last 5 seasons. He scored 53 times in his previous 75 games. He's a dynamic player. And that touchdown upside is the biggest expectation shift I think we need to make with him going from Kansas City to Miami. The other thing is the efficiency and stuff. Like, he blew past his career high in receptions last year, Tyreek Hill, but we saw his efficiency come way down. Like, he barely averaged 11 yards per reception after averaging over 15.5 yards per reception over the previous 4 seasons. His average depth of target came down a bit, but his yards after the catch per reception stayed pretty much the same. So I think, like, his yak upside, by the way, for Tyreek Hill might be a little bit overrated. Like, he's a career 5 yards after the catch per reception guy. And over the last 3 years, he's averaged 4.9, and last year 4 yards after the catch per reception. That is not elite territory whatsoever. So I think the manufactured touches will still be there for Tyreek Hill and for Jaylen Waddle, for that matter. But the volume, like, what I'm saying is the volume isn't really something I'm worried about with Tyreek Hill. The touchdowns are something I definitely am worried about with Tyreek Hill now, but to be a wide receiver one, we just need Tyreek to get back to that, like, elite level of efficiency. He just needs to add more after the catch, I think, in this new location, because he could be the exclusive deep threat for this team as well. But I just don't know what that's going to be worth. Even if because they might want to, they have a decent defense. That offensive line looks better. Like, it might be more confined offense than we're kind of anticipating in that passing game. Like it might be a pretty one-dimensional, low average depth of target offense with some play action deep shots. Yeah.
For sure. And I think there's still definitely production to be had. There's no doubt about that. And like, I still have Tyreek as my wide receiver 10. Jaylen Waddle's back at my wide receiver 19. I could flip flop those two potentially depending, but I think Tyreek kind of for me is just above Jaylen Waddle in the pecking order with the big trade and the big contract. But like you said, like the volume is definitely going to come down. Tyreek has averaged 144 targets the last 3 seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs, where he's played more than 12 games. So that's definitely going to come down. And like you said, these guys are going to have to kind of exceed on efficiency, but I think they have the profiles to do it, right? Like I think these guys can both do it on big plays. You're talking about Tyreek's yards after the catch, and I always thought his were a little bit different in that his are down the field, he's beat his defender by 5 yards, he makes the catch and he runs for 30 more yards, you know what I mean? As opposed to always cats in the True North Fantasy layer, folks. It's never dull. Yeah. Some dogs and kids, sometimes it just gets buck wild in here, but yeah, I think these are two guys who could soak up like 50% of this team's targets by the end of the season, and I think it could be good.
Waddle definitely. I think you nailed it with Tyreek's a back end wide receiver 1 now instead of like a possible elite wide receiver for fantasy, and Waddle's probably a wide receiver 2. It's sad because he just seems so poised for a big breakout, and like with Jaylen Waddle, his season was so based. It was so on the back of volume, how he accomplished what he did last year in PPR leagues, especially. And you just know that volume's going to come down, along with the possibility that the Dolphins just pass the ball a lot less this year, and with the new coaching staff and a decent defense to go along with that offensive line, we're talking about adding some new running backs and all that. So it's just tough because we're left with these super talented wide receivers who are kind of at the mercy of Tua taking a really big leap, because you're going to have to pay up for both of these guys, and that's kind of tough because we thought that might happen last year, and now he's got a new playbook, and it's definitely Tua's time to shine here. There's no more excuses. I'm sure you've heard that on Twitter or whatever, but it's true. Like it's really true. Like it's put up or shut up time for Tua so long as he stays healthy this year.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Tua's the big winner here, right? Like
100%.
Like Tua's the big winner.
100%. He moves from like streamer territory into like a guy who I would start as the quarterback 2 on my Superflex team weekly, and a guy who I might consider if I punt quarterback as somebody who can give you some big weeks with some big like 3 or 4 touchdown weeks because of these guys who can kind of pop the top off of defense.